Good morning. Today the Commission will take up two matters. First, we will consider proposals that would restructure the way mutual funds pay for the marketing and selling of their shares. Second, we will consider whether to adopt rules designed to provide clients with greater information about the professionals who provide them with investment advice. First, we'll begin with the marketing and sale of mutual funds. Currently, Rule 12b-1 governs the way a mutual fund can use fund assets to market and sell the fund to investors. That rule also sets out the way in which broker-dealers can be compensated from the fund for their sales efforts. Unfortunately, the rule has led to confusion, a lack of understanding, and in some cases, some investors paying proportionally more than other investors. Our proposals would replace Rule 12b-1 with new rules designed to enhance clarity, fairness, and competition when investors buy mutual funds. In particular, it would impose limits on the cumulative sales charge or sales load that an investor pays. It would also eliminate the so-called hidden sales charges that 12b-1 fees can represent by, for the first time, disclosing and regulating these fees as sales charges. And it would enable broker-dealers to compete for investors by charging mutual fund sales loads at rates they set themselves, rather than at a uniform fee set by the fund. Rule 12b-1 was born of a period in the late 1970s when funds were losing investor assets faster than they were attracting new assets, and self-distributed funds were emerging in search of ways to pay for necessary marketing expenses. At the time, it was thought that investors would benefit if a fund could grow by using some of its own assets to market itself and make distribution payments. This, it was believed, would result in improved economies of scale and ultimately lower expenses. Even though funds last saw such sustained conditions nearly 30 years ago, Rule 12b-1 has remained intact, even though it was premised on the idea that a fund could use 12b-1 fees as short-term solution to the problem of shrinking fund assets. Very quickly, these fees evolved from payment for advertising and marketing to an alternative form of compensation, or sales load, paid to intermediaries selling fund shares. In addition, 12b-1 fees compensate broker-dealers and other fund intermediaries for ongoing marketing and related services, including record-keeping, transfer agency services, and overall investor education and consultation. Despite the evolution in the use of 12b-1 fees and their emergence as a pervasive element of mutual fund intermediary compensation, the SEC's rules have not evolved. In my view, the regulatory scheme should be squared with the current mutual fund distribution framework and investor expectations of how they pay for fund sales loads and services. In essence, 12b-1 fees have become a means to pay broker-dealers and mutual fund intermediaries directly out of fund assets, indirectly out of fund assets, rather than directly out of the investor's pocket. And as the use of 12b-1 fees have evolved, the aggregate dollars paid have ballooned. Amounted to $9.5 billion in 2009, nearly $12 billion in 2008, and they exceeded $13 billion in 2007, compared to just a few $million in 1980 when they were first permitted. I think that despite paying billions of dollars, many investors do not understand what 12b-1 fees are. It's likely that some don't even know that these fees are being deducted from their funds or who they are ultimately compensating. In addition, investors may not realize they are paying the equivalent of sales loads or commissions at a rate of 0.75% a year over the lifetime of their investment. Nor do investors realize that 10, 15, or 20 more years down the road, they may still be compensating the salesperson who sold the fund. As a result of all of these factors, 12b-1 fees have been disparaged as a confusing part of the mutual fund distribution scheme, one that obscures the actual amount of fund investors paying to intermediaries, and one that could result in some investors paying more sales compensation. Today's proposals are intended to provide clarity and fairness to a mutual fund distribution system that has become confusing and potentially anti-competitive. At the same time, they're designed to preserve investor choice in selecting distribution models and to minimize operational disruptions and expensive systems changes. Today's proposal consists of several core elements. First, this rule would impose greater equity in the way sales charges are passed along to investors, and it would cap the aggregate sales load amount that could be deducted from fund assets. Investors could continue to pay a sales load either upfront at the time of purchase or over time through the deduction of fund assets paid to the broker-dealer who sold the fund shares. However, the proposals would cap the aggregate amount a fund investor could pay in sales loads over time. As such, the investor would stop paying the ongoing sales load after a set number of years, and that number of years would be spelled out for investors in writing on their confirmation statements. In addition, sales loads paid over time could not exceed, on a percentage basis, the maximum sales load the investor would have paid if the load had been paid upfront at the time of purchase. That means if I was buying shares of a mutual fund that charged a 4% upfront sales charge, then that fund could not deduct more than 4% over time. Second, this rule would improve the disclosure provided in a fund's prospectus regarding the fees that are deducted from a fund's assets to pay for sales loads and distribution expenses. Under the proposals, the term 12b-1 fee would no longer be used. As many have argued, the term hinders rather than furthers direct communication and understanding by investors. Instead, funds would be required to separately disclose the percentage of fund assets being paid to broker-dealers, and that amount would be listed as an ongoing sales charge. In addition, funds would separately disclose the percentage of fund assets used as a marketing and service fee, from which third parties are often paid for ongoing services provided to fund investors. The maximum marketing and service fee would effectively be limited to 25 basis points per year. Third, this rule would require mutual fund confirmation statements to clearly convey that some fees will be deducted from the fund each year to compensate the professional selling the fund. The fund confirmation document, which an investor receives from a broker-dealer confirming a trade, would have to show the percentage of the upfront or ongoing sales charge. In addition, it would also have to disclose the amount of sales and marketing fees expected to be paid, and would have to state that management and other fees will be deducted from the fund and thus indirectly paid by the investor. Fourth, this rule would pave the way for a new form of improved competition by permitting broker-dealers to sell funds at sales loads that they choose. Rather than sales loads set by the fund in its prospectus, broker-dealers could compete with others, thereby likely leading to lower charges. I believe that mutual fund investors, like all consumers, want the ability to engage in comparative shopping based on price. Together, today's package of proposed reforms would modernize and improve the mutual fund distribution network, while hopefully leveling the playing field for all investors. I want to thank the staff for their incredibly hard work and their creative thinking on this proposal. I look forward to hearing more detail about this important investor-oriented initiative. Before I turn it over to Buddy Donahue, the Director of the Division of Investment Management, who was a driving force behind this initiative, I want to thank a number of staff who contributed to this important proposal. Working with Buddy were Bob Plays, Hunter Jones, Diane Blizzard, Thoreau Bartman, Daniel Chang, and Thu Ta in the Investment Management Division. In addition, this core team received the strong and able assistance of Paula Jensen, Josh Cans, Ignacio Sandoval in the Division of Trading and Markets, David Becker, Meredith Mitchell, Lori Price, Jill Felker, and Sarah Buscher in the Office of the General Counsel, Henry Hu, Harvey Westbrook, Lori Walsh, and Woodrow Johnson in the Division of Risk Strategy and Financial Innovation, Jean Golke in the Office of Compliance, Inspections, and Examinations, and Lori Schock, Rich Ferlato, and Mark Sharma in the Office of Investor Education and Advocacy. And I'll now turn it over to Buddy to hear more about the staff's recommendation.